My name is Elaine Parker, and I was 59 years old the night I watched my son-in-law drag my daughter by her hair across the floor of a crowded restaurant while her little boy screamed for her. If you had been sitting where I was sitting, close enough to hear the sound of her pain, close enough to see everyone else freeze in silence, I wonder what you would have done. It was supposed to be a celebration. We were at a cozy Italian place in downtown Chicago, the kind with warm lights and old black and white photos lining the walls. My grandson, Eli, had just turned 5. He wore a paper crown the hostess had given him, and he kept swinging his legs under the table, humming to himself as he waited for cake. From my seat, I could watch him and his mother at once, something grandmothers learn to do instinctively, the way you learn to breathe without thinking. Hannah looked tired that night, even in the soft blue dress she'd bought on sale after a long shift at the clinic. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes held the kind of exhaustion no sleep could fix. When she reached for her napkin, her sleeve slipped just enough for me to see a delicate bruise circling her wrist. Faint, yellowing, but real. A mother always knows, though sometimes knowing is the heaviest burden on earth. Marcus was on his second glass of wine, laughing too loudly at his father's stories. Gerald had chosen the bottle himself, reminding the waiter twice that 30 years on the force had taught him how to choose quality. Linda sat beside him, hands folded neatly, laughing whenever she was supposed to and never when she wanted to. Then the waiter arrived with dessert. Eli's chocolate cake drew a chorus of claps, and Hannah leaned in to help him blow out the candle. When the waiter set a small plate of tiramisu in front of her, she smiled politely. "I'm sorry," she told him softly. "I'm allergic to nuts. Could I have the fruit tart instead?" Such a simple request. Marcus's chair scraped back. His eyes darkened. Why do you always have to make everything difficult? And before I could even breathe, he reached down, grabbed a fistful of her hair, and yanked her backward, hard enough to make her cry out, hard enough to make the whole room go silent, hard enough to shatter the last piece of doubt I'd been clinging to. That was the night everything broke. And it wasn't where the story began. Hannah met Marcus on a warm June afternoon at a coworker's backyard barbecue, long before any of us guessed what he was capable of. She came home that evening with a glow I hadn't seen in years, the kind of brightness that sneaks into a woman's voice when she feels seen for the first time in a long time. She sat at my kitchen table, pulling off her sandals, telling me how this man had stood beside her while she flipped burgers on the grill, asking about her patients, her favorite books, the places she wanted to travel one day. She told me he'd listened, really listened, as if every word she said mattered. For a moment, I let myself believe she had met someone good. 2 weeks later, he knocked on my door with a pie from a bakery that charged more than I usually spent on dinner. He complimented my garden as though he'd been reading a script, offered to fix the loose hinge on my screen door, and carried in the grocery bags I'd left in the car. He called me Mrs. Parker. Even after I asked him to use my first name, charming, polite, attentive, I could see why Hannah's face softened the moment he walked into a room. Still, even then, something inside me stirred. Not quite a warning, not yet, but a small tug just beneath the ribs. A mother notices harmony, but she also notices when a melody has a strange note in it. When Hannah invited me to dinner at their new apartment, I arrived with a bottle of sparkling cider and my usual desire to approve of anything that made my daughter happy. The place was spotless, not clean, spotless. Every pillow perfectly placed, every photo frame angled the same way, the kitchen counter shining as though no one had ever cooked there. Hannah used to be messy in the most endearing way, leaving half-read books on the couch and mismatched mugs in the sink. This version of her home felt curated, like a showroom she'd been instructed to maintain. She cooked a beautiful meal that night, and Marcus hovered behind her like a shadow. When she laughed too loudly at one of my stories, he placed a hand on her shoulder in a way that made her lower her volume instantly. When she reached for the salt, he moved it closer before she could touch it. When I asked if she still met her old co-workers for coffee on Fridays, he answered for her, telling me how those friendships weren't healthy influences. Hannah didn't correct him. Later, while clearing the table, she bumped her hip on the counter and winced sharply. The sound was too quick, too practiced. When she turned away to hide the expression on her face, her shirt lifted just enough for me to see a bruise the size of a thumbprint near her ribs. She caught me looking and tugged her shirt down so fast it nearly tore. "I'm fine," she said before I even asked the question. "Just clumsy." Her voice trembled for half a second, just half, but long enough for that tug beneath my ribs to tighten. After dinner, Marcus walked me to my car. He asked if I'd had a good time, then leaned his forearm on the roof as I opened the door. His posture looked casual, but it trapped me in place. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. "Hannah tells me you worry a lot," he said. "She's lucky to have someone looking out for her." Something in the way he said it chilled me, like a compliment wrapped tightly around a warning. In the weeks that followed, Hannah drifted further away without ever leaving my sight. She canceled our Saturday breakfast because Marcus had surprised her with plans. She stopped wearing the bright dresses she used to love and switched to long sleeves, even in heat. She never stayed on the phone long. She always had somewhere to be, something to finish, someone waiting. The moment that cemented my fear came one evening after she worked a double shift. I brought over a bag of groceries, letting myself into their apartment when she didn't answer the door right away. The TV was off. The lights were dim. Hannah stood in the kitchen, staring at the refrigerator, her hands gripping the counter so tightly her knuckles were white. When she turned around, her lip had a small split on one side. "Hannah," I whispered, "what happened to your mouth?" She touched it quickly, hiding it behind her fingers. "I bit it," she said. "Eli kicked during nursing last night. I jerked forward. It was an accident." Her explanation unraveled too fast, like a lie she'd rehearsed but hadn't expected to use so soon. I stepped closer and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. She flinched, not a dramatic flinch, but the kind that tells a mother her child has been bracing for impact long before she walked into the room. "Baby," I said softly, "look at me." She did, but only for a moment. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, toward the closed bedroom door, as though someone might step out at any second. "I'm fine," she whispered. "Please, Mom, just drop it." And even though every part of me screamed not to, I did, because fear had already wrapped itself around her, and I didn't yet know how to break through it. But the bruise on her ribs, the split lip, the long sleeves in summer, they all rooted themselves deep inside me. A mother always knows. And my knowing was starting to hurt. Hannah found out she was pregnant the following spring, and for a brief moment I allowed myself to believe that life was offering her a fresh start. She showed up at my house on a rainy Thursday afternoon, hair damp, coat half-zipped, holding a tiny sonogram picture in both hands. When she placed it on my kitchen table, her fingers trembled with a soft kind of joy I hadn't seen in months. I pulled her into my arms, felt her shoulders relax in a way they hadn't in far too long, and whispered congratulations into her hair. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, bursting through the door with the energy of a man who wanted an audience. He held Hannah's waist with one hand, the sonogram with the other, showing it off before I even had a chance to speak. He talked about names, nursery themes, baby-proofing, all while Hannah stood beside him, trying to keep up with his enthusiasm. When I asked how she was feeling, Marcus answered for her, telling me she was a little emotional, but doing great. Hannah just smiled weakly and nodded. During the months that followed, his attention began to harden. He insisted Hannah stop working nights immediately. Then he suggested she cut back on her hours altogether. Soon after, he told her that once the baby was born, it would be pointless for her to return to the ER because, according to him, a good mother stays home. Whenever she hesitated, he framed it as concern, saying he didn't want her stressed, didn't want her driving alone, didn't want her eating food from places he didn't approve. At first, his control disguised itself as care. But little by little, I saw Hannah shrinking. The lively nurse who used to rush between patients with purpose now moved like someone walking through thick fog. She rarely visited. When she did, she arrived with explanations already prepared: why Marcus needed the car, why she couldn't stay long, why she had left her phone in the cup holder so she wouldn't miss his call. One afternoon, I stopped by their apartment to drop off maternity clothes a neighbor had given me. Marcus wasn't home, and for once, Hannah didn't seem rushed. She sat with me on the couch, rubbing her belly absent-mindedly, telling me the baby had been kicking nonstop. For a moment, I saw the girl she used to be, laughing softly, resting her head on my shoulder. Then her phone buzzed. The sound alone made her flinch. She snatched it off the coffee table and read the message with a sharp inhale. Her voice changed when she spoke, tight and careful, like a string pulled too hard. "I should start dinner," she said, standing abruptly. "He'll be home soon." I followed her into the kitchen and noticed the way she kept glancing at the clock, at the door, at the shadows around her. When she reached up to grab a pot, the hem of her shirt lifted, revealing the faint outline of another bruise along her side. It was smaller than the one I'd seen before, but darker, fresher. I felt the floor drop beneath my feet. "Hannah," I said quietly, "that's not from slipping on the stairs." She froze, her back still turned to me, hands gripping the pot so tightly I worried it might break. When she finally faced me, her eyes were glossy, and her voice came out in a whisper I could barely hear. "Mom, please don't make me talk about this. Me." My instinct was to pull her into my arms, to wrap her up and drag her out of that apartment, but she stepped back before I even moved. Fear lived in her movements. Fear breathed in that kitchen. Before I could say anything else, Marcus's keys jingled outside. Hannah straightened her posture, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and forced a smile so brittle it threatened to crack. He walked in, kissed her cheek, and asked why dinner wasn't ready yet. She apologized immediately, her voice small, almost rehearsed. I stood there watching the exchange, a quiet horror spreading through me. Marcus didn't have to raise his hand in that moment. The fear he carried into the room did the work for him. It controlled her posture, her voice, her heartbeat. I left shortly after, unable to breathe in the carefully arranged air he had created around her. As I walked to my car, I heard the faint sound of Hannah's nervous laugh filter through the door. The girl who once talked freely about her dreams now lived inside a shell someone else had built for her. Driving home. I gripped the steering wheel until my fingers went numb. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to knock on that door and bring her home with me. But I also knew the truth every mother learns the hard way. You cannot pull someone out of a cage they refuse to admit they're trapped in. That night, I sat on my couch staring at the dark window, listening for a phone call that didn't come. And the fear settling in my chest told me one thing with a certainty I could no longer deny. Something was spiraling, deeper, faster, beyond the reach of hope. 2 weeks passed after that uneasy afternoon, 2 weeks where I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. I told myself Hannah would call if something was wrong. I told myself she was just tired, just overwhelmed, just adjusting to pregnancy. But mothers don't believe the lies they tell themselves. Not really. We repeat them anyway, hoping they'll soften a truth we're afraid to face. Then came the night at the restaurant. When Marcus dragged Hannah by her hair across that polished floor, something inside me broke open. I didn't think. I simply moved. I reached for his wrist and pulled his hand away from her. Hannah folded forward, gasping, her fingers trembling as they clutched the back of her head. Eli cried so hard he hiccuped, reaching for her with both arms. "You don't touch her again," I said, my voice shaking more from rage than fear. Marcus straightened, chest puffed, jaw clenched. For a moment, he looked stunned that anyone had dared to intervene. Gerald rose halfway from his seat, not to stop him, but to watch more closely. Like a spectator at a fight he felt entitled to critique. "She embarrassed me," Marcus snapped, glaring at Hannah as if she were the one who had caused a scene. "She asked for a different dessert," I shot back. "Not a crime. It's disrespect," he barked, jabbing a finger toward her. "She knows how it looks when she questions me in front of my father." Gerald nodded, smug and satisfied. "If a woman can't keep her place in public," he said, "she sure won't keep it at home." Those words made the entire restaurant shift. A few people gasped quietly. A couple at the next table exchanged a horrified glance, but no one stepped forward. No one spoke up. Some kept eating. Some pretended not to hear. The world is full of people who'd rather look away than get involved. The manager hurried over, his face pale. "Sir, we need to calm things down. Maybe take this outside?" Marcus ignored him and grabbed Eli's arm instead, yanking him from the chair. "We're leaving," he said sharply. Hannah rose too, still holding the back of her head, eyes glassy with shock. I stepped in front of her. "You don't have to go with him," I whispered. "Come home with me tonight." Her eyes widened, not with hope, but with fear. She shook her head quickly. "Not now," she whispered. "Mom, please." Marcus jerked his head toward the exit. "Let's go." Hannah followed, clutching Eli against her chest, moving like someone who'd been trained to shrink herself to survive. I watched the three of them walk out the door and felt my heart splinter into pieces, too sharp to gather. For days afterward, she barely answered my calls. When she did, her voice was clipped and shaky, as if someone were listening in. She said she was fine. She said I had overreacted. She said Marcus just had a bad night. But each word sounded like it was being spoken with a hand pressed to her throat. Then one morning, everything changed. It was just after 5, the sky still dark. My coffee not yet brewed. My phone rang, vibrating loudly across the kitchen counter. The number was unfamiliar, from a neighbor on Hannah's street. "Are you Elaine Parker?" the woman asked, voice trembling. "Your daughter. She's at my door. She's hurt. She's bleeding." I didn't remember grabbing my keys. I didn't remember running to the car. I didn't remember a single second of the drive. All I recall is the pounding in my chest, the kind that comes from knowing your world is seconds from shattering. When I pulled up to the house, the neighbor stood on her porch in slippers and a robe, one arm wrapped around Hannah, the other steadying Eli. Hannah's clothes were torn at the shoulder. Her lip was split. A red mark spread across her cheek like a slap that hadn't finished burning. Eli clung to her side, crying into her shirt. "Hannah," I whispered, reaching for her. She collapsed into my arms, shaking violently. "Mom," she choked out. He tried to choke me. I thought I was going to die." The neighbor's porch light flickered overhead, casting shadows across Hannah's bruised throat. The ambulance siren grew louder from down the street. My daughter's hands were ice cold in mine. I looked at the neighbor, at the open door behind her, at the empty driveway next to it, and I felt a kind of terror I'd never known. "Where is Marcus?" I asked. The woman swallowed hard. "Still inside. He's yelling. I locked the door as soon as she got out." A police car turned the corner, lights flashing without the siren. I held Hannah tighter, shielding her, burying her face against my shoulder. That morning, before the sun had even risen, I finally understood the truth I'd been refusing to face. My daughter wasn't just scared, she was in danger. And the man she lived with, the man she once trusted with her heart, had almost killed her. At the hospital, everything moved in a blur of white coats and clipped voices. I stayed close while nurses lifted Hannah onto a gurney, fastening monitors to her chest, brushing hair from her swollen face. Eli sat on my lap in the waiting room, his small fingers tangled tightly in mine, afraid to let go. When the detective arrived, a calm woman with tired eyes, she asked Hannah what had happened. For the first time in years, my daughter told the truth without looking over her shoulder. "He choked me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I couldn't breathe. I thought Eli would see me die." The detective nodded gently, taking notes. "Has he done this before?" Hannah's lips trembled. She looked at me, as if asking whether she was finally allowed to speak. I squeezed her hand. She inhaled slowly, then gave the smallest nod. That was enough. Marcus was arrested an hour later. They found him pacing the living room, still shouting, convinced he'd done nothing wrong. When the police called to inform us, the detective glanced at me with measured sympathy. "He'll go before a judge this afternoon. We'll request a no-contact order." I thought hearing those words would ease the tightness in my chest, but fear doesn't let go that easily. Fear lingers like a smell that clings to fabric long after the fire is out. After the exam, Hannah was released into my care with instructions to rest and a thick packet of resources she was too exhausted to read. I drove us home slowly, checking the mirror every few seconds. When we finally walked into my house, she stopped in the entryway and looked around as though stepping into a different world. Eli ran to the couch, curling into a blanket like a child who'd been cold for too long. That night, Hannah slept in my bed while I stayed awake beside her, listening to every uneven breath she took. In the dim light, her bruises looked darker, her fear heavier. The next morning, the phone rang. It was Marcus's mother, Linda, sobbing softly. "Elaine, please, don't let her press charges. He just loses his temper. He doesn't mean it." Her plea felt like a slap. I ended the call before anger could sharpen my voice. Later that week, we attended the bail hearing. Marcus stood in a cage of glass, wearing the same arrogance he wore at that restaurant. He scanned the room until his eyes found Hannah, and for a moment, I felt her body sway. Trauma recognizes its source, but she stayed upright. She didn't look away. The judge granted bail but issued a restraining order so strict one misstep would send him straight back into custody. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was a start. When we left the courthouse, Hannah reached for my hand. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm scared he'll come for us." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. "Then we build a life he can't reach." She cried, not from pain, but from the first breath of freedom she'd taken in years. That evening, she told me she wanted to press charges. Truly press them, not back down, not explain it away. She wanted a real chance at safety. I felt something warm rise in my chest, not pride, not relief, but a quiet strength that came from seeing my daughter choose herself. In the weeks that followed, she met with advocates, gathered evidence, gave statements. She flinched less. She slept more. Eli stopped waking up screaming. Sometimes I'd find Hannah in the backyard at sunrise, staring at the sky as if reacquainting herself with a world that no longer hurt her. And one morning, As she stood there holding a cup of tea, she said, "Mom, I think I'm finally coming back." I looked at her bruises fading into soft yellow, her shoulders no longer hunched, her voice steadier than it had been in years. Yes, I thought, my daughter is coming home to herself.